Hi, I'm the History Guy. I have a degree in history and I love history, and if you love history too, this is the channel for you. 205 years ago today, May 11th of 1812, something happened which had never happened before nor since. The sitting Prime Minister of the United Kingdom was assassinated. Now, you might think that the assassination of the Prime Minister, literally in the House of Commons, would be a traumatic event for the English people. But the public response to the assassination of Spencer Perceval was actually surprisingly ambivalent and even celebratory in some places. And the reasons why have less to do with the Prime Minister himself than the events of the day. 1812 was a difficult and unsettled time for the United Kingdom and for the world. Not just because of the monumental events of the day, but also because of the disruptions caused by the unavoidable drumbeat of time and progress. Spencer Perceval had been a successful solicitor who was pulled rather reluctantly into his career in politics, although he rose quickly. In 1809, he became Prime Minister by surprise, the result of an unlikely series of events and parliamentary compromises. He was an ardent opponent of Radicalism and an enemy of Napoleonic France. At 5:15 p.m. on May 11, 1812, he had just stepped into the lobby of the House of Commons on his way to a meeting. A man stepped in front of him, drew a pistol from his jacket, placed it up against Perceval's chest, and pulled the trigger. Perceval reportedly said, "I am murdered." Those were his last words. The first concern was that the assassination might have been the start of a broader rebellion, but it was not. The assassin, a businessman named John Bellingham, had a personal complaint against the government and had become convinced that shooting the Prime Minister was the only way for his complaint to be heard. But the fear of a broader rebellion was real, and despite his personal motives, there were those who supported Bellingham's act. And to understand that, you have to understand the challenges facing the United Kingdom in the year 1812. And to start, we have to talk about the state of the monarchy. In 1812, the king, George III, had been ruling for 52 years, the longest reigning British monarch up to that time. And while his reputation has gone through many different revisions, one thing was clear. The king was given to bouts of extreme madness. He had fallen into one of those bouts of madness in 1809, and Spencer Perceval had been compelled to pass a Regency Act, allowing the king's son, the Prince of Wales, to rule in the king's stead. But King George III was an ally of Spencer Perceval, and the Prince of Wales was an opponent. Doctors said there was a good chance that the king would recover, and therefore Spencer Perceval had placed restrictions upon the prince's regency, which angered the prince. But the prince had not called for a new government, because he was afraid that his father might recover and would be angry if the prince had dismissed the king's favorite politician. And so at this extremely challenging time for the empire, the stabilizing influence of the monarchy was at its weakest. And the relationship between the prime minister and the regent was, at its best, an uneasy truce. And then there was the devastating Napoleonic Wars. Britain had been fighting Napoleon's France since 1803, and the Allies fighting France had faced some significant defeats. The British Army was mired in the Peninsular Campaign in Portugal, and while as Chancellor of the Exchequer, Spencer Perceval had managed to come up with financing for the war without further raising taxes, the cost of the war was devastating the economy, and England was in deep recession. And then there was the cost in blood, which had been underlined by the disastrous Walcheren campaign in 1809. Britain had sent an army with the goal of capturing Antwerp and opening up a second front against Napoleon. But while the army was staging on the Dutch island of Walcheren, it was struck by disease, and 4,000 soldiers died. The campaign had cost £9 million and 4,000 lives for no military gain. And Perceval's government had barely withstood an inquiry into the campaign in 1810. Of more immediate effect was something called the Orders of Council, which had been passed in 1807 in response to Napoleon's economic attack on England that was called the Continental System, which essentially embargoed trade with England. In response, England embargoed trade with France and allowed English vessels anywhere in the world to board any ship and confiscate cargo if they were accused of doing trade with France. This was not only driving England towards war with neutral states like Denmark and the United States, but it had a devastating effect on trade. The value of English exports and imports had dropped 75%, and some industries were devastated. In fact, Spencer Perceval was on his way to an inquiry into the Orders of Council when he was assassinated. And the economic woes were exacerbated by a new challenge: technological progress. The English textile industry had been particularly hard hit in the recession, and there was significant underemployment when a new villain arose: automated textile machines, which the workers saw as a direct threat to their jobs. The movement that arose was called the Luddite movement, which was named after an early leader of the movement, and they would engage in what was called machine breaking, which means that they would break into factories and bust apart automated machines with hammers. By 1811, the Luddite movement, which was centered in Nottinghamshire, had moved to open rebellion, and the government response was extreme. At one point, Britain had more troops fighting the Luddites than they had fighting Napoleon, and Spencer Perceval took the blame. When he was assassinated, there was open celebration in Nottingham. And all these woes were derived from the social forces of the time. The French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon had really been a reform movement that was opposed to the excesses of monarchy and proposed republican reform. And while Britain had been repulsed by the Revolution's own excesses with the guillotine, Britain could not ignore the forces of reform. One of the loudest voices for reform in England was a member of Parliament named Sir Francis Burdett, who was one of those radicals that Spencer Perceval opposed. And he proposed reforms to Parliament, like standardizing parliamentary districts and universal male suffrage. One of the most divisive issues upon which the two disagreed was the issue of Catholic emancipation, which had to do with repealing laws that dated all the way back to the 16th century that had sought to protect the Church of England by placing restrictions on Roman Catholics in Great Britain, including a prohibition against Roman Catholics serving in Parliament. Perceval had supported King George III in opposing Catholic emancipation, and that had put him at odds with Francis Burdett, to the point where Perceval's government had had Burdett jailed on the charge of libeling the House of Commons. When Perceval's assassin was being taken in the wagon to his trial, Burdett supporters mobbed the wagon because they were anxious to congratulate and shake hands with the assassin. In many ways, the assassination of Spencer Perceval represents the chaos of the era. The decline of monarchies, the rise of republicanism, the emerging industrial revolution, and the devastating Napoleonic Wars changed England and the world. Not long after his assassination, the tide of war would turn and would lead down to the path of inevitable defeat of Napoleon, and the resulting economic recovery would give Perceval's successor time to deal with these pressing issues as the nation moved into the Victorian era. And that begs the question of how different Perceval's legacy might have been had he not been assassinated. Symbolically, Spencer Perceval was the last of the British prime ministers to wear the powdered wig and short button pants representative of the fashion of the 18th century, as if his passing literally represented a change in eras. King George III never recovered from his bout with insanity in 1809, although he would live clear until 1820. The assassin, John Bellingham, refused to plead insanity, and so was executed by hanging. A descendant of John Bellingham serves in Parliament today. Spencer Perceval left behind a widow and 12 children, and the question of what might have been. The Chief Justice at Bellingham's trial lamented the country's loss with the assassination of Spencer Perceval. He said, "By his death, charity has lost one of its greatest promoters, religion one of its finest supporters, domestic society one of its happiest and sweetest examples, and the country one of its brightest ornaments. A man whose ability and worth was likely to produce lasting advantages to this empire and ultimate benefit to the world." I'm the History Guy. I hope you enjoyed this edition of my series, 5 Minutes of History, short snippets of forgotten history, 5 to 10 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please feel free to click that thumbs up button that is there on your left. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to write them in the comment section, and I will be happy to respond. And if you'd like 5 minutes more of Forgotten History, all you need to do is click the subscribe button, which is there on your right.